Thank you, Sally. When we think of the great public servants that we've been lucky to have here in Boulder, the name of Penfield Tate II is always mentioned. He was an All-American football player. He served in staff and command positions in the U.S. Army. He became a lawyer. He served on the Boulder City Council and became our mayor in the mid-1970s. He was a tireless champion of civil rights and human rights in this community. Today's presentation will be about Penfield Tate II, and who better to deliver it than his son, Penfield Tate III. This Pen Tate lived here in Boulder when his dad served on council. Like his father, he became a lawyer and has devoted much of his adult life to public service in the Colorado State House and Senate, in Denver municipal politics, and in positions in state government. Pen Tate III is the founder of Tate Law PC, a law firm focused on public finance and municipal law. Please give a warm Rotary welcome to Penfield Tate III.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm joined by my wonderful wife, Paulette, who is here. And she's wonderful for a variety of reasons, not the least of which, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a techie. So she had to help me put the slideshow, the PowerPoint together. I did a couple artsy things with it that I'll probably won't point them out, but we'll see how it goes. But the PowerPoint is the work of my wife. Over the years, I've had occasion to come to Boulder and speak on a number of different topics in front of a number of different groups. And I usually do something to frame the conversation and get a frame of reference for myself and for the audience. But I don't need to do that today because when I came in, I saw one of my high school classmates here. So I don't need to get a frame of reference in terms of how long here people have lived in Boulder here, because I can sort of look around and I've met a few other people. I saw the Mayor Durgan here and some others, so I'm like, okay, these are folks who have some history here. Oh, Dorothy, hi. Dorothy Rupert is here, former state senator. Her daughter and I started junior high school together. So it's kind of like old home week in a number of different ways. So let me start here. I included this slide, and many of you recognize it. It is on the north side of the Boulder Public Library. Quick plug, the artist who did this is a fellow in Denver, Thomas Evans. He goes by Detour. And if you've been in DIA recently, you may have seen some sculptures or works with different suitcases arranged in interesting ways. That's his work. But I wanted to put that up there because when I first saw it and spoke with him, and my sisters and I were together, we looked at it and we were just taken with how vividly it captures sort of the essence of my dad, especially the eyes. It was almost haunting in a way to see it. And being on the library is appropriate because my mother worked at the Boulder Public Library for about 30 years as we were growing up. So it's just kind of interesting to see it. So I just offer that by way of a quick plug for Detour. Picture of my dad real quick, just wanted to have this as he was going off to college and leaving high school. My dad was raised in rural Ohio in the southeast portion of the state, actually not that far from West Virginia. He grew up in Amish country And so it was very much farmland, agricultural. The biggest employer in the city was the steel mill. The bank was owned by the family that owned the steel mill. It's a company town. You get the picture. And he was born in 1931, so you get a sense of that. He was the second oldest of 10. He had a younger brother who died when the brother was 5 or 6. I think my dad was in his early teens when his younger brother died. He grew up in a segregated town, and that's important to note because it sort of framed his outlook on life. Many people talk about segregation and think it's a Southern phenomenon alone. It is not. New Philadelphia, Ohio was segregated, so much so I would know when I was getting close to the neighborhood where my family lived because the paving stopped. So the streets weren't even paved in the black neighborhoods. About once a year, they'd come and spray tar on the dirt or maybe some oil to keep the dust down, but that's how you knew where you were in New Philadelphia, Ohio. My dad went to Kent State University on an academic scholarship because he was an excellent student as well as a high school football star. When he went to Kent State, 2 things happened that sort of changed his life. Number one, he became the first college football All-American at Kent State University before Jack Lambert, who was a linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I always point that out to people who are fans. But he was the first All-American at Kent State. And that was important because he was one of the stars of the team, and he often described experiences where Kent State would travel to play other schools in the region, like in West Virginia and other places, and there were times when, although the school had made arrangements to house the team couldn't stay there because they wouldn't let blacks stay in the hotel. And his coach was extremely supportive. He told me one story about his coach cussing and fussing and tearing up the lobby of a hotel because they didn't tell him in advance that black players couldn't stay there. And so his coach relocated the team someplace else. The other thing my dad did when he was at Kent State is he joined ROTC, which really helped shape the direction of his life. This is when he graduated from Kent State, and he went from Kent State to officer basic training in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is where he met my mother, because his roommate was a Philadelphia native, and one weekend he introduced my dad to all of his friends, which included my mother's older brothers, and that's how he met my mother. Story for another day. But my dad was an artillery officer in the military. As I said, he graduated from Kent State. He got a pre-law degree and a degree in poli-science. He pretty much knew he wanted to be a lawyer, but 2 things happened when you committed to ROTC back in those days. When you graduated, you went to officer basic training because you were going in the military. And number 2, he was drafted by the Green Bay Packers, and he said 2 things about that experience. Number 1, being a first lieutenant paid more than being in the NFL at that time. And number 2, the Army wasn't going to let him out of his commitment. So he went to Philadelphia, went through officer training, and from there he served in the Korean War. He went overseas and served. We always grew up calling it Formosa because that's what it was when my dad was there. But now we all know it as Taiwan. The other interesting thing is when he went to Formosa, his unit's assignment was to protect Shanghai Shek, who had been driven from mainland China by the communist rebels. And so we have family photos with my dad and Shanghai Shek and some of his generals and cabinet ministers after they fled mainland China, which is always an interesting story to hear. The other thing about the Army for my dad was, unfortunately, it reinforced some things he experienced growing up in Ohio in a segregated town. When we lived on military bases around the world, many of them were segregated bases. Now, I have talked to people who told me that can't be true because Eisenhower desegregated the military. Yeah, that's what the executive order and everything said, but that was not the reality. So much so that when we were stationed in Chicago, my dad was in charge of officer housing on the base, but we were not allowed to live on the base because black officers couldn't live on the base. And I remember asking my dad about it, and when he questioned his superiors, they told him, the Army doesn't discriminate, but we do conform to the social mores of the communities in which we're in. So basically, not our fault, blame it on these other folks, but you can't live on base, which was fine because we lived in the south side of Chicago where I started elementary school, and that's a whole nother wonderful story because we lived next to a man and his wife. She was a dancer, he owned a jazz club, and as a kid, I got to see Duke Ellington and a bunch of performers, just watching them come to his house in the evening. So I'm glad we didn't live on base. After about 14 years in the service, my dad left and went to CU. We came here to Boulder, totally by accident. Another weird story that he had a classmate here from high school, and that's why he went to CU. They had a speaker box. His classmate called the admission committee. They admitted him to CU on the spot, which I don't think happens anymore. He had done 2 years of law school at night when we were posted in different cities around the world. So he only did 1 year of law school at CU and graduated in 1968. I think at the time he was like the 4th or 5th black graduate of the CU Law School. From there, he started his legal career as a labor attorney for, and I'm gonna see how many people recognize this, Mountain Bell Telephone and Telegraph. Yeah, okay, I see a bunch of hands waving. So that's where he started his career. He worked there for a number of years. Then he was called to CSU to work for then President Ray Chamberlain. So this is the time when the country was dealing with anti-war protest against the draft, Vietnam, civil rights, a host of other things. And CSU, like a lot of other college campuses, including CU in Wyoming, were having issues with protests by students. And my dad was hired to work with the students to help deal with some of the issues. I think that was important for him because it put him, he was already an older law school student, having spent 14 years in the military before he went to law school. Now he was dealing with students who had a different perspective, and he was very much an anti-war sympathizer. I think Vietnam is part of why he left the military. So he spent a couple years at CSU and then started his own law practice. When he came to Boulder, Dad got it, when he left CSU, Dad got involved. He was on the Boulder Human Rights Commission first, and then he ran for office in 1971. I think there were 24 candidates, 5 open seats. He was the top vote getter, which amazed people. One interesting thing, former Mayor Ruth Carell was his campaign manager. And I remember they were having a campaign meeting in our living room, and the big debate was, should my dad put his picture on the campaign literature? Because a couple of the people said, Penfield Tate, we got them fooled. They won't know you're black. And my dad's like, they're gonna kind of know I'm black once I go to a debate or go somewhere, so let's put my picture on the campaign literature. And so they did. He got elected with Karen Padgett, who is second from the right in the back row, Tim Fuller, who was on the far left in the front row, and let's see I'm trying to see which picture that is. Oh, let's look down here. Janet Roberts and Ruth Carell came later, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Ken Wright was also elected. 4 out of 5 incumbents lost that year. And so it was a huge shift in the political climate in Boulder. Mayor John Buechner was the only incumbent who ran and won in that election cycle. There was a desire for radical change in Boulder, and they got it. There were a number of divisive issues, a lot of change happening. Council meetings were packed. Live radio broadcast, KBOL. No, the old Boulder radio station, I just forgot. KBOL, that's okay, I did remember that correctly. Actually, that's when they started doing live radio broadcasts of city council meetings because they were Donnybrooks. And my dad and his colleagues felt everybody should have a right to come in and vent, and everybody should have a right to do that in person. And all of the council members duly elected needed to sit there and hear it and take it because that's what you signed up for. And so that's what they did. 2 of the members on the council didn't want to put up with it. I mean, it was bad. And so they resigned. And that's how Janet Roberts, back row far right, and Ruth Carell sitting just to my father's right, got elected, or actually appointed to the Boulder City Council because some of the people who had been there a long time just said, life's too short, I'm not doing this anymore. It was a very, very interesting time in Boulder. My dad was elected, appointed Mayor of Boulder by his fellow council people in 1974. This is Tim Fuller congratulating him. They were fast friends and political allies on a host of issues. My dad's issue was always that if you're elected to office, you need to lead with empathy, you need to lead with understanding, you need to lead with patience. He never lived to see me elected to public office, but when I was young, he used to always tell me, if you run for office, if you're successful, please remember, your name's not mayor, your name's not senator, your name's not representative, your name's Penfield. Someone had the job before you, someone will have the job after you. So you have to keep things in the proper context. A story about my dad, and you can see he looks kind of worn. These were difficult times in Boulder. Boulder was changing rapidly. Growth was an issue. Open space was an issue. Affordable housing was an issue even in those days. As I said, bitterly divided. Meetings talked about anti-discrimination, affordable housing, managing growth, and open space. But my dad always kept a level head about this. So this is something my dad did that I vehemently objected to. But his whole point was, son, let people work out their frustrations any way they want to. So one of the county fairs, he was in a dunk tank. And I said, well, at least, wear a shirt and some swim trunks or something. He's like, no, if they want to dunk the mayor, they're going to want to dunk him fully clothed. So that was sort of his perspective. He dealt with issues seriously. He took people's concerns seriously, but he didn't take himself too seriously. He was a very serious man, but he felt he needed to be able to empathize with where people came from. Right after he became mayor in 1974, Dad appointed the Core Area Revitalization Committee, which started the process to create the Pearl Street Mall. And a lot of people focus on what my dad did in terms of the human rights ordinance, but this was really one of his passions. And this was something he really pushed. This is a picture as construction was starting, and this was the finished product. He felt it was important, just like other places have vibrant downtowns and focal points. He thought that Boulder needed a focal point. Boulder needed a place that became a central convening spot for the people, and with the county courthouse right there, he thought the Pearl Street Mall was the perfect sort of thing to do to create that sense of place downtown. This is a picture taken of him at the time when he was dealing with the human rights ordinance. Long story short, Boulder had an ordinance, but in '74, some people in Boulder with the LGBTQ plus community came to Dad and said, hey, look, since we have an ordinance, would you be willing to sponsor an amendment just to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation? He was a civil rights lawyer. That's what he did for a living. It was a no-brainer to him. He's like, sure, it'll be easy. They ran the ordinance. It was passed by the city council, but there was a huge conservative backlash to it. People called it the special preference bill, and a host of other things. That's when things really got nasty in Boulder, and I was in high school at the time. I remember people talking about Boulder as lesbian homoville. People would refer to my dad as the African queen. My parents actually made a special request of me at that time. I was a senior in high school. They're like, rearrange your course schedule at Boulder High and get home before your sisters and go through the mail and separate out the hate mail that's coming and put it in your dad and my bedroom. We don't want your sisters to see any of that. and it was ugly. People would ride by the house and honk and holler stuff. It got to be tough, and it really weighed on my dad. This is the night of the recall election, which he survived. Tim Fuller did not. This really bothered my father because he thought Boulder was moving forward. And I think we all forgot that in many ways, Boulder was a rural community with a university that sort of dropped down in the middle of it. I heard some people say historically that Boulder lost the coin flip with Canyon City back when the University of Colorado was created. Canyon City won the coin flip and picked the jail. Boulder ended up with CU. And so this was that night. The Human Rights Ordinance ended my dad's political career. When he ran for re-election, he came in well behind all of the front runners. Even when he attempted to run for the state house out of Boulder, even the Democratic Party would not nominate him as their candidate. But he continued with his practice, and I joined his practice. We were both civil rights lawyers. He enjoyed representing people who'd been discriminated against, marginalized in their employment. This was my dad being inducted into his high school, his college Hall of Fame, which was really an honor for him. Dad stayed politically active. He was twice a delegate to the Democratic National Convention. He was co-chair of Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition when he ran for office. This is my mom and dad with the governor. Dad was close friends with Governor Romer, which may be why I ended up on Governor Romer's cabinet some years later. But so they were fast friends, and as I said, he remained politically active. He spoke out in support of human rights. This is a speech he gave on the CU campus. After he passed, a local artist made a bust of him. That is the bust surrounded by his then surviving siblings. One of my dad's passions was, this is not clicking. One of my dad's passions was baseball, which is ironic because he was a football star. He loved baseball. He was on the Metro Stadium District that built Coors Field and financed it and helped bring the Rockies to Colorado. Regrettably, he never lived to see Coors Field completed. And so this is a plaque you'll see on the wall behind center field when he passed away. And then 2 years ago, what is 2025? 2 years ago, City Hall was renamed for my dad. All of his then living siblings and a whole bunch of other family and friends showed up. It was a wonderful occasion, and I remember telling someone that Boulder finally feels like home again. I never thought my dad would receive that tribute, given what he went through. But that was really moving for me, my wife, my sisters, and all of us. And it was nice to see him recognized in that way. He was a man who led with humility. He believed in the innate decency of all people. In many ways, your four standards are kind of what he lived by. Live and let live, let people have their say, but when you're elected official, you really need to try to be responsive to people. And that's what he was about. Thank you. Did I make it? Happy to take any questions you may have.
Ken, we're really glad that you're here to share about your dad. I was just sharing with Sue. I remember, I'm a lawyer as well, now retired, but in 1976, that summer when I graduated from law school, that spring, I had to take the bar exam, and I was at a fundraiser at your home that fall, and I heard while I was there that they had the results of the bar exam and you could call a certain number to find out whether or not you passed. And it scared me, but I asked your dad if I could borrow you the phone so I could call that number, and the good news was that I passed. So anyway, but my question is, what was it like for you growing up with that kind of, yeah, well, I mean, you shared a lot of things with us, but I mean, just from your own personal side, what was it like for you growing up with your dad in Boulder throughout that time?
You know, I was always very proud of my dad. He was, in every respect, my role model. When I played Little League Baseball, he was the coach. He found time to coach the team. And he was always someone I could talk to about anything. It was hard to watch him attacked constantly over issues that many of us thought weren't real issues. And he held up well in public, but when he'd come home, you could just see that it was taking its toll on him. And my mom often, my mom was a very blunt woman. I won't quote her, but she would often ask him, why are you doing this? There are people who don't appreciate it. Why are you taking this grief? And he would always say, but there are more people who do appreciate it. There are more people who support what I'm doing. It's just the detractors are drowning out. And I got some backlash in high school. I mean, there were, at Boulder High School at the time, there were 4 blacks in my graduating class. We never had more than 17 black students in Boulder High School the whole time I was there. Part of the reason was way back when CU had a relationship with some of the HBCUs, and they would bring some of their younger professors for training. They had a program at CU to help them become more accomplished lecturers and instructors. And so we would have some black students who would come to Boulder for a year or 2 and then leave. But everybody knew who you were. You couldn't hide anywhere.
Hi there, thanks for being with us today. My question pertains to that feeling you described in New Philadelphia of being segregated. You mentioned it also on the military bases and just alluded to the small numbers of blacks when you were in high school. What does it feel like today to be black in Boulder?
I don't know about being black in Boulder because I now live in Denver. And I'll be candid, it's no accident. When I graduated from high school, I basically got a job and moved to Denver. And my mom was really upset, but she told my dad, you knew he wasn't going to stay here once he got done. And I moved away and never came back. Even when I came back from law school, I lived in Denver. So I've sort of watched Boulder from a distance. It looks like some of the same issues I dealt with back in the 70s are still alive and well in Boulder, unfortunately. I think Boulder has grown a lot in many ways with regard to race relations, but when I talk to blacks who live here now, it's the small microaggressions you deal with every day that are difficult. I remember my middle sister when she started school at Baseline Elementary School, or primary school at the time, and she used to come home and say that some of the students told her that if your skin's not white, you can't be pretty. And when you're in 1st or 2nd grade, it's kind of hard to process that. So I think it's come a long way. I'm worried about where greater society is headed, given the tone that's being set in Washington, D.C. We'll see how that plays out. But sort of how I see it.
Thank you so much. I have a question that's a little bit about the bigger picture, which is what do you feel the role of people who take a political office in a city as opposed to at a state or a national level? How important was that at the time when your dad was serving, and how important do you think that is now?
I think local office is the most important office there is. That's the office that's closest to people. That's the office that makes sure, your trash gets picked up, your streets get plowed, you're safe on the streets, you have a functioning school system that works in cooperation with your city. I've always thought that was the most important level of government. You have to be approachable. You have to be available to people. Even when I served in the state legislature, I used to tell people I got some of my best ideas in aisle 13 of the grocery store because people would come up to you and either say something about you ought to do this or ask you, why did you vote this way? Accountability is important and transparency is important. And so that's why I think local government is so important. I'm sure Mayor Durgan probably has experienced that as well, so.
Penn, as we talked briefly before lunch today, I want to be sure everyone here understands that many of you know Penn on air, on television. He's been serving on Colorado Inside Out on Channel 12 for, gosh, I don't know, 20, 25 years, and doing a great job of serving as a moderate, very thoughtful, calming influence on that panel. But what it also reminds us of is that his father was a member of the Channel 12 board back in the 80s. And so it's a nice legacy to have the link for the two of you on that particular public television institution. But I'm wondering if there are other 1 or 2 or 3 examples of things that your dad did that people don't know about so well, that there were, influences that he had on other institutions and people as he did in the Channel 12 and the public television community.
Yeah, Wick, thank you. There are. My dad served 16 years on the board of Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, CHAFA. And in that role, he was instrumental in promoting affordable housing and small business financing around the state, which he took immense pride in doing that. Through our church, St. John's Episcopal Church, he was active when St. John's helped create the San Juan del Centro affordable housing development. Used to be out on Iris. I know it's been moved further outside of the county, and the county sent when the tax credits expired, but affordable housing was a big thing that was important to him. When we moved to Boulder, there were not a lot of affordable housing developments, and I remember some of them were, and people here may remember, the old Quonset huts, those metal structures that were kind of like this. That was some of the affordable housing. It was awful, it wasn't insulated, it was hot in the summer, it was cold in the winter, but that's what Boulder had, and my dad was instrumental in creating affordable housing.
Do we have any more questions in the room? All right, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I had a chance to greet Penn, and am really honored, Penn, to have you here and to talk about your father and your mother, who was a formidable force. I remember her many times going, Penn? This community is far, far better because of Penn Tate. Both Penn Tates, I would say.
Thank you.
He was a remarkable man, a very strong and committed leader who had a deep sense of justice and, sadly, but a real experience of injustice as well, as we've heard. And he made so many differences in our community that I hope we all live up to his example. I was one of the group of people that was looking at expanding the human rights ordinance, and I was barely new into politics. And a group of us met with Penn, and we nattered on about this wasn't the right time, and maybe we needed to revise the ordinance, and maybe we should think about all the political activity that was happening at the time, and blah, 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 blah. And your dad sat there very quietly, and then he leaned forward and he said, sometimes you just have to do what's right. And I think of him so often, and that certainly has guided me both in my political work and in my life. He was a remarkable man, and this community owes a great deal of debt and honor to the whole Tate family. We are better because of the Tates, and I really want to acknowledge you and your dad and your mom, whom I adored.
Thank you.
As you know, Rotary always gets the last word, so that would be the last word. But in your honor, we are donating 100 doses of polio vaccine in the effort to eradicate polio from this world. Thank you.
Thank you.